Hello, welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp, joined by Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
This is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other shite.
And this week it's shite. So we got a lot to go down.
Spoiler alert.
We're gonna run through some stuff at the beginning. Got a lot for you. Stuff on prison news. Stuff on what Biden's administration's been up to. We got a great listener mail from someone asking for more info on what's going on in China. But anyway, let's get started. So you guys know we try and avoid doing just like electoral bullshit, but obviously.
Blah.
The first 100 days of the Biden administration is where if there's going to be significant change from Trump to Biden, now is when you'd see it. And many are pointing to, well, it's happening, right? We're seeing it. And yet almost all of the executive orders and things I've seen, other than the ones dealing with COVID, I think that there has been a shift in the way this country will deal with COVID. But other than those,
But not the shift it needs, like,
well, no,
universal health care is a fucking human right.
Yeah, of course. But I'm talking.
I
more
understand.
average.
I just wanted to go a little bit further.
You just wanted to shite on what I was saying. But most of these executive actions, they're in the vein of something we would want, and yet when you really look at them, they're window dressing. They're not getting to the heart of it. For example, and actually we're going to get more into prison news in a minute, but okay, largest prison state in the world, private prisons are a catastrophe, an awful problem where people are making money off of having people locked up. It's disgusting. It should be like war profiteering used to be. It should be illegal to prison profiteer. But of course it's not in this country where everything's up for sale. And Biden went forward and announced an end to privatized federal prisons. This and of course the liberal media jumps up and down and goes, "This is great. No more profiting off of federal prisoners. This is wonderful." And then if you actually read, how many prisoners are we talking about here? 0.6% of the American prison system is private federal prisons. 0.6, less than 1%. So is it better than nothing? Of course. And here's the thing. Others will say, well, he can only control what goes on in the federal level. He can't control state private prisons. But what would Trump do if this was something Trump would wanted? Okay, well, next step, Trump would say he would make announcements and speeches and tweets about how states need to close their private prisons right now. And he would see how they deal with that. Do they thwart his authority and keep them all open? Or do they work to close their private prisons? He would also then threaten the states with, well, we're going to take away A, B, and C, your highway funds, your whatever military funds go to states. Like, there are things that the federal government under the executive could take away from states if they don't close their private prisons. But of course, Biden and the liberals would never talk about any of that.
No, not at all. And I think like the other thing is the Democrats just love always saying, our hands are tied, we can't do anything. And, people have pointed out that...
They were born with zip ties on their hands.
Right? Golden ones.
You might have to tell that story in a minute, but go ahead.
It's not really a story. It's just that someone had posted on Instagram that there is, in fact, a metal zip tie ring that you can buy that's $600.
Legit.
I'm not kidding.
It doesn't look... I know right now in your mind, everybody, you're picturing like a diamond-studded thing that looks like
it's just metal.
A zip tie. No, this is just... From a distance, you think this person has a black zip tie on their finger. And this is over $600.
Yeah.
I think it was on sale for $600.
Either way, it was just like it hurts.
It's the worst.
It hurts.
It's the most disgusting level of consumerism, but also at the same time as consumerism and wealth beyond all reason, it also is like kind of mocking imprisonment. Like,
right.
Zip ties are funny, but for detained immigrants,
they're chic.
Yeah, when you actually have to fear things like ICE and the cops, it's not chic. It's not fun.
Although it reminds me of Carlin's joke. Is it Carlin or is it Bill Hicks? The joke, like, if Jesus came back, you really think he'd want to see a fucking rifle or a cross?
So that's Hicks.
Like showing a rifle to JFK.
Yeah, so that's Hicks, but Dick Gregory, who obviously was much older than Hicks, but when I opened for him, did a very similar joke. It could have been parallel thought, but his was, it's like wearing an electric chair around your neck. like a little electric chair.
It totally is. It's so bizarre. It's so bananas. Anyway, but we digress. What like the things that the Democrats love to do is always say like, oh, we just can't. Like in Obama's latest book, it was just filled with, I really wish that I could have done the right thing. It's like, you're the most powerful person in the fucking world, you dumb shit.
If only there was someone you
I
could
know.
talk to.
If only.
If only he had someone's phone number who could change these things.
But this is so typical, right? Like when confronted with, for instance, the Anita Hill hearing, which Biden ran and controlled, he's like, you know what? I wish I could have done something different.
Years later,
you could have.
Yeah.
So
he said, "I wish I could have somehow given her a fair hearing or something like that." It's like, you ran the fucking thing.
I wish I could have talked to the person who was running this fucking show. God damn it. But this is typical, right? And this is what we saw under Obama as well, when Democrats controlled the White House and both houses of Congress, which, spoiler alert, the Democrats do now as well. And the idea that, we can't. We'd love to, but we can't, is that typical... what is so indicative of the Democrats, right? Like, oh, we'd love to help you, but we can't, which is really just, we don't want to help you, but we want to make it look like we are, which is, of course, where you get the great memes and commentary, like, would you like your bombs straight up or wrapped in a fucking rainbow flag?
Sadly, I think the motto for the Democrats, for Biden, not on everything, but on certain things, on the actual good things they claim to want to do, should be, what would Trump do? Because he would fucking run roughshod over everyone to get his shit done.
Well, right. And as you've pointed out in the past, the power of the president to change, the discourse is incredibly great. So, for instance, even if you can't do an executive order to, for instance, change the way the entire prison system runs, you could have the president up there showing like the documentary 13th and being like, this is so fucked,
right?
Oh my god, we still have slavery, we have to do something about this.
Just a single tweet from Biden and his top executives or whatever, his top administration, saying everybody needs to watch the movie 13th, like,
right,
would have a huge impact.
So it's like, even if you can't make an executive order, you can fucking do a lot. So yeah, it's whenever you hear the Democrats fucking hand wringing and pearl clutching and alligator tearing, just remember they don't actually fucking care, and there's so much in their power that they could do that they won't do because they don't give a flying fuck.
Could do, but they won't do should be their song. They should write some lyrics, some music to that. So real quick, other things that are going on in the Biden administration is now we're seeing, actually, because Tony Blinken's been confirmed, Secretary of State, we're seeing some of this foreign policy and the talking points on this foreign policy almost identical with China. Almost identical, maybe even more belligerent on Iran, because they have now said that Iran is weeks away from getting a nuclear weapon. Fucking bullshit, utter horseshit. And it's designed to just continue this war against Iran, where our sanctions have killed tens of thousands there. And then, with... so Iran, China, Russia, most of it's staying the same. Biden actually claimed we're going to be worse on Russia, which, if you listen to this show, you know that despite Trump's talking points on Russia, which seemed friendly, the Trump administration and the U.S. government were actually worse on Russia, harsher on Russia during Trump's time than they were under Obama. So then Biden gets up there and says, we're going to finally be hard on Russia. And it's like, dude, what more can you do without fucking firing missiles? I mean, you've fucking recreated the Cold War. You've added sanctions since the Obama era. You've continued to encircle them with NATO. You've
dropped out of nuclear treaties.
Which luckily Biden claims he is getting back into some of those. And the last thing on the quick rundown I wanted to mention is Ecuador's election. We covered it a bit in our live stream, and I then had Ali Vargas on to talk about what happened in Ecuador. Big victory for the socialist, anti-IMF, anti-American imperialism candidate, Andres Arauz. And however, because there are multiple candidates from big parties, unlike somewhere I can think of, there will be a runoff, so it's not over, but he won easily against the two kind of neoliberal candidates, one of them a complete, banker shit show, who may not even get into the runoff. It's very close as to who's going to get into the runoff. His last name is Lasso. And then the other candidate, the third candidate, is, yes, he's indigenous, but he is completely tied to America and neoliberalism, and last time around he actually campaigned for the banker Lasso. So really this is the Socialist Party against the two neoliberal parties, and there will be a runoff, but at least in this round, a big victory for the socialist Rafael Correa's party, which it does not have. I mean, it's amazing for them to do that because they don't have the media. Like, the media is completely just throwing propaganda against them. The government tried to bring in charges against Rafael Correa.
The understanding, like the base understanding of U.S. imperialism and who the real enemy is in a great number of Central and Latin and South American countries. I mean, it's just it's so far exceeds our own understanding of U.S. imperialism, or even just like imperialism in general.
Right.
But so there's like, and I've seen this in reports that have come from folks like Venezuela Analysis and Gray Zone and stuff like that, when people are on the ground in Venezuela talking to people like on the street and asking them like, hey, what do you think of what's going on? Like, do you blame Maduro? And they're like, it's just like regular folks that, they're not like college professors or some shit. They're folks that, in this country we would consider very lower class. And they're like, no, it's all bullshit. We know U.S. imperialism. And it's like, yeah, there's just like a base understanding.
I think it's called education.
Yeah. Is that what we call it, education? Yeah, so it's more difficult. It's much more difficult with an educated populace to railroad them and make them hate their own democratic, systems, or their own people.
And Vargas's point also was that you get the neoliberals, or sometimes right-wing coups into place, like they did in Bolivia, like they were in the 90s until Chavez in Venezuela, and Vargas was like, but you can lie to people all you want, but they can ultimately, at least after a few years, see the results of the governing.
Right.
And so everyone's getting screwed. Poverty shoots through the roof.
Yeah.
There's all these austerity measures. And so the governing with Lenin Moreno in Ecuador showed people, the other option. You can go with a version where the government's there to help people, or you can go with the version where the government is there to exploit and enrich themselves from the people.
And this is also why the Democrat-Republican argument here is so sticky, because not that much changes.
Right.
So it's really just about how you personally relate. That's why it was like, oh, I could have a beer with George Bush. Like, why the fuck does that matter? Also, no, I wouldn't.
And he wouldn't pay for it.
Right? So it becomes like a personal relationship to the president, as opposed to how are people actually, living under the policies. Well, if the policies don't really change that drastically, then you get to that fundamental understanding that, holy shit, both parties are owned by the same people, and oh my God, it's all a fucking joke. It's a racket. And that's scary.
So we are going to move on. That was our quick rundown of what's been going on in the topical new. Well, it's all everything we do is topical, but the political landscape, let's say. And now we want to get into some of what's been going on in the largest prison state in the world, America's #1. Fuck yeah, go fuck yourselves. All right, that's my favorite song.
Thank you, Lee.
Just made
that's
up just
beautiful.
now. But yeah, we say this a lot, but our prison system is. It's talked about like, oh, we wish it could be better, but it's this thing no, it's a fucking crime against humanity. Mm-hmm. Like, the way our media talks about it is completely opposite of what, like, they'll act like they're not a fan of it, but they won't act like, this is fucking horrific. People's lives, millions of people's lives are destroyed, whether they're in prison or they have a family member in prison, destroyed on a regular basis. And we act like, oh, these are Americans and we're all in this together. Yeah, not if you're locking them fucking all up for non-violent crimes.
Well, and I just actually I've been listening to a great another great pod. Also, just in terms of shout outs, if y'all haven't seen Lee's live streams, they're fucking wonderful.
Aww.
And I like kind of like eavesdrop because I'm sitting in the other room and I'm like, and I have to stop myself from saying shit out loud, like fuck yeah, or laughing out loud, because I feel like that would sound weird. Hey, there's this other human
Fuck
in
yeah.
the other room.
I've been thinking of hiring a hype man, so or hype person.
Hype person, thank you. But yesterday he was on with Judah Friedlander, which was wonderful, and yeah, so please just go watch that. But I
That's
was
at youtube.com/
Sorry.
moment of clarity.
I'm only a slightly good hype person because I won't tell people how to find you. I'll be like, now run and find it for yourselves.
And people just spin in circles in their living room. Where do we go? Where do we go? I don't know.
No, so I was listening to a podcast called The Constant, which is a history of getting things wrong, and it's fucking brilliant.
Huh.
And the one, it's a 3-part series that I just listened to.
Now we're in the present of getting things wrong.
Well, but he covers that too because the 3-part series was called How to Solve a Murder, and it goes all the way back to.
Oh, we need to do a long segment. On this.
I know. I just wanted to highlight it
This is
for
so
folks.
Great.
It goes back to the ordeals, like where they'd have people walk over hot coals, and if God knew you were innocent, then, God knows you're innocent, obviously. You wouldn't be burned because only the guilty get burned. So there were a lot of guilty people back then.
Apparently, everyone was guilty because very few just walked through hot coals untouched.
So he starts with like that kind of shit and then goes up until like, present day with, blood spatter analysis and bite mark analysis and all this other shit, highlighting that it's some bullshit. And actually even something like fingerprint analysis, the National Academy of Sciences released a report several years ago that basically said that shit's not accurate. And basically said that, one of the big problems is that, these studies that they do or the analysis isn't blind. So they know about the people that they're doing the analysis on,
Right.
Which obviously shapes the outcome. Also because all of these labs are connected to police departments. So I guess if police are racist and, classist and the hammer of the state, maybe the labs that work with them are the same.
It's kind of like the algorithms we've started creating for whether people should be prosecuted or get bail or whatever. And it turns out that when you have a bunch of racist people putting in their findings into the algorithm, you end up with a racist output from the algorithm,
Right.
or the AI. But yeah, we did a longer segment a while back on the tooth bite analysis and how much garbage that is. Like literally, they said to all the tooth bite. There's an official tooth bite scientific committee or whatever group you can be a part of. They sent out a sample bite marks to all of them and said, please reply with one of 3 possibilities. This is bite marks. This is not bite marks. This could be bite marks. And 2/3 of the people got it wrong. Like a third were certain it was not bite marks when it was.
Well, and so with bite marks, you might be like, oh yeah, I've heard that. But with fingerprints, we just think of that being true, right? But there was a similar study done with fingerprints where they sent out, like a bunch of fingerprints and said, match these with the people who, match them. Analyze them and get the right answer. And a lot of people got it wrong. I can't remember the exact number, but also some of these were cases that they had already worked and put people away. So they got them wrong the second time they analyzed them, although they were quote unquote 100% sure the first time that it was somebody else. So the whole thing.
So it sounds to me like what we're saying and what he's saying in this podcast is that, yes, our fingerprints are individual. They are unique to each person. However, our way of studying them can be a little off. And the times fingerprints would be useful and generally accurate would be like if you suspected the husband had killed the wife, but you had a clear bloody fingerprint somewhere, and you needed to prove it was his. Then you could compare those two, because you're only dealing with two, the one in the blood and his. Whereas when they insert a random fingerprint they found in an apartment,
which, by the way, is never
a-
like a perfect fingerprint. It's typically, a partial, it's smudged. It's not like this, oh my God, someone just perfectly, because that's not how it works, right? Nobody's like sitting there in
Right,
blood putting
right.
their fucking fingerprints on it.
well, and you see the way they take the fingerprints off. That they have the little dusting with the tape.
Yeah.
It's like that doesn't look that accurate. But even let's say they had a really good fingerprint. The entering that into a computer that has millions of fingerprints to try and get a perfect match is very flawed.
Well, right. And of course, the person you're looking for might not have their fingerprint in the system. So you could do what, and there are several examples he gives, but like one of them was the bombing in Madrid that happened in 2004, I believe, the terrorist bombing. And so FBI and Interpol were both working on the case, and FBI said that they were 100% sure that it was this lawyer in Oregon who they just wanted to nail because he had been defending people who had ties to Al Qaeda, and so they were like, "Fuck this guy," and they said it was him. And then the Spanish police finally were like, "It's not what? No, it's not. That would be totally random." So, yeah, basically, it's bullshit, and I highly recommend that folks listen to that. But the reason that I brought up The Constant and that issue is because, Lee, you pointed out that there are folks rotting in jail for nonviolent crimes. There are folks rotting in jail for violent crimes too, but there's a chance that they didn't do it, right?
Right.
Because the quote unquote evidence that put them there is highly flawed. So that's something that we will come back to another time. But I wanted to share this. I got an email in late January from folks in Florida that are working on the issue of incarcerated folks, and I think it's the COVID-19. Nope, never mind. That's not it. Sorry. Anyway, this is Broward County in Florida, and they
Always
basically
some good legit stuff going on in
Right.
Broward County.
and they basically found that after the ACLU got involved on behalf of inmates who were sick with COVID and weren't getting treatment and weren't getting appropriate care, the ACLU got involved, and there was a response from the jails like, oh yeah, we're gonna deal with that. It turns out now that after months after that whole rigmarole, it turns out that the spread of COVID in these jails is coming from the guards. And not from the inmates themselves, because of course the inmates can't fucking go outside and contract COVID.
Right, and you would think like, oh well, they do see their families. So no, I don't think they do during the pandemic. They're not allowed to see their families.
Right, and so after the settlement with the ACLU, sorry folks, there was a little bit of a technical issue
I
there.
knocked over something.
It's good that these aren't on video because there's some weird shit that happens. So after this settlement with the ACLU, where the jails said that they were going to improve conditions, the COVID continued to spread, and basically it became clear that it was spreading through the guards, who had total disdain for the safety and the health of the inmates.
You're kidding. If you become a prison guard,
I know.
You don't care and love every prisoner.
Yeah. So, and this is not exclusive to Broward County in Florida. This is just, I got this information from them. And meanwhile, their response has been to create a lockdown. And the report states that many callers from Paul Rain, that's one of the jails, report that the lockdown is excessive, unnecessary, and torturous. They explain that they're housed in an open-air dorm without solid doors confining the cells, making social distancing impossible. The lockdown serves as a way to make incarcerated life punitively more miserable, restricting all time spent out of cell 1.5 hours a day, including the time it takes to eat, shower, and make phone calls. There are also reports about shakedowns, incidents where incarcerated individuals' belongings are searched, are searched, which of course, when people are coming into close contact with people's belongings, that obviously is not social distancing. And also one of their quote unquote ways of stopping the spread of COVID has been to shut down the drinking fountains, which means that all drinking water comes from shared bathroom faucets, which I'm sure that's not problematic.
Nice.
Um,
Well, and I think this speaks to, like, you know, a society can be judged by how it treats the least among it. And we treat prisoners like they should be thrown away and ignored by society. I mean, these stories hardly get any coverage, which is why I'm glad we're covering them here. They hardly get any coverage by the mainstream media because the general thought of both, I think, your average mainstream journalist who, let's be honest, if you've succeeded in getting to the top of mainstream media, then you probably are doing pretty well. And you probably came from a pretty good background to begin with. They and most of their readers don't care because, well, these are prisoners, these are bad people. Which, of course, as we've said before, that is a bullshit lie. We've told ourselves to be okay with locking up people for decades. Most of them are not bad people. Most of them have not done horrible crimes. Most of them are in there for fucking bullshit like having a little weed on them or, you know, drunk driving, which is not something I encourage. But guess what? You drunk drive as a wealthy white guy, you don't go to jail. You drunk drive as a poor black person and you're in jail for 5 years. Like, yeah. Anyway.
Or people are in jail for the crime of not being able to get out of jail. You know?
Not having like the lawyers and things.
Right, and this is something
I thought you
that
meant not having enough grappling hooks to get over the wall.
well, you know, grappling hooks are hard to find. And this actually flows into the next prison story, which comes from St. Louis. Folks might have seen this. There were some really powerful images of an act of civil disobedience that took place in the early morning of February 6th because of the inhumane treatment by the folks that run this facility in St. Louis. And folks can find, if you look on Facebook at Expo St. Louis, this is a page that shares information and quotes and stories from folks that are incarcerated in St. Louis. And the one from February 6th, which is where I'm pulling this information from, is really harrowing. And it speaks to why some of the prisoners felt it was necessary to take this action, and they speak of you know, the escalation that led to this point. You know, we only saw the broken windows, but the escalation to this point is considerable. So back in December, several inmates came together to voice their needs, and saying that their treatment was inhumane. They said that they were being treated worse than POWs, that this was, you know, this could be likened to a concentration camp. They were hungry, they were cold, they were being smushed together with healthy people with people who had visibly and audibly COVID symptoms. And so, you know, then the retaliation for basically voicing these concerns, not staging an act of civil disobedience or anything like that, but just voicing these concerns. The writer of this post says, quote, "We were subjected to tear gas, hosed down with water, placed face down in inches of that now contaminated water in order to be handcuffed, transferred to the known dilapidated medium security institution nicknamed the Workhouse, placed in the hole without proper heat, dry clothing, or face masks. All this because we were trying to tell jail staff and management that we don't want to die, that we're hungry, that we want proper ventilation, that we're tired of being cold without being given winter clothing, that we want proper PPE for COVID-19. And he lists some other points, including being price gouged at the commissary and vending machines. And, you know, he points out that by New Year's Eve, this was happening in December, by New Year's Eve, there were 51 people that were in the hole, in one pod, which is supposed to hold a maximum of 60 people pre-pandemic. And, you know, this was a mix of people who were healthy and people who, as he writes, were visibly and audibly infected with COVID. And, you know, he goes on to list just incredibly awful treatment, and caps it off with, we feel like POWs in a foreign land and hostile territory. Because of our blackness / ancestral ties to Africa or Latin America, we are being treated less than human. We are dying in unheard of numbers and being intentionally infected at alarming rates.
And so along with what I said about people not caring because, these are criminals, these are bad people, so it doesn't matter, I think there's another factor to their brutal treatment, and that is, what was it, the Princeton jail study where the students were randomly given two roles, either prisoner or guard. And
Stanford.
Stanford study. Which was the one? So was it Princeton was where they shocked them, the Milgram.
Oh, right.
Study.
The CIA thing.
You're right. Stanford was the prison study, and there's a great movie on this as well. That I think was at least used to be on Netflix, but and it didn't matter that these people were chosen by random. Within the span of a few hours or a day, they had basically psychologically joined themselves with their role. The guards became abusive, and the prisoners became, refusing to do what they were told because they realized the guards were abusive and fuck this. And it just added on itself. But the level of abuse that your average, fucking upper class Stanford student was willing to do within the span of 24 hours to a fellow student who actually had not committed a crime, but they pretended as if they had. It's just amazing, but it goes to show how quickly the human mind will adapt to the role they're given. Now, granted, there are a lot of variables in this, which is why people criticize the study, but, where it wasn't done enough on enough people to know whether this would happen every time, but I think it still speaks to something important.
And we can look at history, right? I mean, I think one of the like a main driver and impetus for that study in the first place was what happened in the concentration camps, right? Because this was done like in the 60s or 70s. So you're only 25 years removed from the Holocaust, which still, obviously casts a long shadow still today. So it was even more fresh then. And this question of how could the concentration camp guards possibly do this? And then, you've got pictures of them out on the town when they get off work, smiling and drinking. Like, how could you possibly have that, juxtaposition? And of course, it's not like a simple answer, but the answer is that you don't see these people as human. There is no human empathy at play
right.
because these are not humans. And the same thing holds true here, which is why I think that, that person's nod to concentration camps is very powerful, because this is something, our prisons are concentration camps. There's forced labor. Obviously, there's no heat in the winter. They're hungry, and this is what we see in the in places where immigrants are detained as well. This same kind of same kind of treatment. And so I think that this and he also highlights in the post that some of the people here are. He mentions one guy has been waiting 5 years for a trial. So people that are being treated like this haven't even been convicted of a crime, which again is not the point, but it's the idea that even if you were one of those fucked up people that wants to punish people for like this, wants to torture people for doing wrong, these people haven't even been convicted of anything that they've done wrong, right? So,
or were wrongly convicted. Yeah.
Right. So it's just like the whole fucking thing is just horrific.
Well, you mentioned slave labor, and I just want to remind everyone that as Kamala Harris said, then we wouldn't be able to get all the jobs done. So we need the slave labor.
I think maybe Jefferson Davis said that too. I don't know. Maybe.
All right, shall we? Well, I want to say some quick notes before we move to the next story. We have a live stream this Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Eleanor and I will be going live.
Come hang out with us for Valentine's
Come hang out. Yeah, Valentine's fucking Day, motherfuckers. You don't see that Hallmark card. But yeah, we did one last weekend, and thousands of you attended, which is really awesome. That's really exciting to see all of you and all y'alls. And but again, that live stream will be 8 p.m. Sunday. That's Eastern time, so 5 p.m. Pacific. And for other countries, you do the math. I ain't doing it. I definitely ain't doing it. Also, we are not promoted or sustained by any kind of paid advertising, any companies, any corporations. It's all just you. So if you have a chance to throw in $1, that's patreon.com/commoncensored. You can get extra content there. We do almost every week. Patreon.com/commoncensored. And you wanted to tell people about?
I want to tell people about this Thursday, which is tomorrow from where I'm standing. Thursday, February 11th, I'll be doing a live Q&A with Frack Tracker about my film. Paul Corbett Brown, who's in the film, will also be joining the Q&A.
Paul's awesome.
Yeah, he's fucking wonderful. Such a beautiful human being. And that's part of Frack Tracker's environmental justice film series. So you can check out more about that information by going to hardroadofhope.com and scrolling down to screenings, or you can just go to Frack Tracker. And yeah, come hang out with us, and we'll be talking about the film. We'll be talking about fracking and the movements to fight and build. So yeah, come hang with us.
Shall I go to this cool listener mail we got?
Do it.
Okay, so we got a great listener mail question. We love receiving those. You can email commoncensored@protonmail.com to send us questions. Do you want to read, or at least read the key part, and then I'll go into the analysis of what he
Sure. So we got this mail from Chris. Thank you, Chris, for this mail. And he writes, I know you both briefly touched on the situation with the Uyghur Muslims, and I'm definitely wary of mainstream media reports about this, but this issue has me scratching my head. I'm hearing conflicting reporting from many outlets that I listen to on a daily basis. I listened to a long segment on Democracy Now! And an episode of the Socialist Program with Brian Becker that seemed to tell conflicting perspectives. Would you be able to go into greater detail about what you think is happening?
Great points, Chris. And this is one of these topics, as was the so-called chemical attack in Syria. This is one of these topics that splits outlets which are often viewed as kind of more left alternative outlets. For those of you who listen to us regularly, you've probably heard us criticize Democracy Now! Before. Both of us, Democracy Now! Was kind of, for me, very pivotal in waking me up. So yeah. I have a lot of love for Democracy Now! In the past, but
I have past love.
They have either changed or just kind of failed to keep up with what reality is or something. I'm not sure what goes on there.
Especially on foreign policy.
Aaron Mate, who was a producer there for several years, has done great breakdowns of what's, the falsehoods that Democracy Now! Has been pushing. But this is a good one because this, another kind of viewed as left-wing alternative outlet that has a problem on this is The Intercept. And sometimes this can have to do with the same outlet having multiple viewpoints. So we saw that with The Intercept and Russiagate. You had James Risen, formerly with the New York Times, pushing Russiagate garbage on The Intercept. And you had Glenn Greenwald, the co-founder of The Intercept, who was basically forced out recently, breaking down all of the garbage on Russiagate and showing you how much garbage it was. And they actually had one debate online between James Risen and Glenn Greenwald, and Greenwald just kind of ran laps around him. It was pretty ugly to see. But anyway, so sometimes you can have competing viewpoints on the same outlet. But in this point, you mentioned Brian Becker and Democracy Now! And this has to do with media literacy, and without even looking into it, I know that I don't think ever seen Brian Becker be wrong about something. He may have an opinion that's a little, harsher or less harsh than mine, but I've never seen him be factually wrong on anything.
Right. His research is incredibly solid.
Whereas Democracy Now! Was factually and provably wrong on, trusting the white helmets, trusting some of this Russiagate garbage, and they seem to be wrong. I haven't seen the Democracy Now! Report on the Uyghur Muslims, but I know that if Chris is saying they're the opposite of Brian Becker, then they are saying that these million-person, quote-unquote, concentration camps exist. Now, I want to give you one example of how this bullshit gets started. And I am also not saying that I know everything about the Uyghur Muslims or how they're treated in China. I don't know everything. You should do your own reading, find sources you do trust, and get into it.
But that's where the media literacy comes in.
That's where the media literacy comes in. A lot of these outlets are going by a couple of reports. And the Gray Zone did a great breakdown of when this shit started. In 2018 was around when they started, where outlets started putting forward the million Uyghurs in camps lie. And the Gray Zone, this is Ben Norton at the Gray Zone writing at the time, and how this started and where it comes from. And by the way, John Oliver has also echoed this horseshit. So a lot of it came from a UN committee that then was echoed by Reuters. And so the UN committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, conducted a review of China's compliance with International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. But the review was basically by one American that has ties to all of the things you would expect an American to have ties to. And then, let's see if I can find what it... So the allegation of these Chinese camps, a million Uyghurs in Chinese camps, was not made by the United Nations. And in fact, the UN office responded to the Gray Zone and said that allegation was not made by the United Nations, but rather by a member of an independent committee. That member is the only American on the committee and one with no background of scholarship or research on China.
Awkward.
But then you see how this game of telephone gets started. This UN member says something. It is then picked up by Reuters. Reuters then runs with the headline and publishes a report with an explosive headline that says, quote, UN says it has credible reports that China holds million Uyghurs in secret camps. Okay, so you've gone from one member, not the UN, saying this, to the UN says this. Now it gets even worse.
Well, and you've also got, let me just pinpoint something there. You've also got credible reports. Well, what does that mean? Right. Whenever you read those words, credible report, that's not good enough.
Right.
That just means that you don't know, but you just assume, or the guy told you, oh, no, it's credible. It's credible. So with that, there's so much room for wrongness in that line, right? So you really just have to accept that whatever's coming from that is credible, even though you have no source, no proof.
But so then it gets even more wrong because so after the Reuters report, the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Intercept all latch onto this Reuters report and echo it in harsher terms. So The Intercept's Mehdi Hassan, who I believe now is given an MSNBC job because he's done the faithful work of the empire, and they saw him, and they were like, we see you, great job, come on board. So The Intercept then runs with the headline, and this is coming from the Reuters report. That is the entirety of where this information was coming from. The headline, quote, 1 million Muslim Uyghurs have been detained by China, the UN says. Where's the global outrage, question mark? Well, maybe it's not there because this is bullshit. But so now you see the shift. This went from one person at the UN on a committee, from an independent committee, to the UN in general, has credible reports, to 1 million Uyghurs have been detained by China. It is the accuracy and the adamancy of these reports is growing as they echo down the line.
It's kind of like fingerprinting. There was this little smudge of a fingerprint, and then 2 steps down the road, I've got it. I'm 100% certain.
And let's see. So the OHCHR's, which is the committee at the UN, official news release on the committee's presentation of the report showed that the only mention of an alleged re-education camp, quote unquote, in China was made by its sole American member, Gay McDougall. This claim was then echoed by one other member. McDougall said she was, quote, deeply concerned about, quote, credible reports alleging mass detention of millions of Uyghur Muslims in, quote, internment camps. The AP reported McDougal, quote, did not specify a source for the information in her remarks at the hearing. So you've got one member with no source
Who
saying
says
this.
allegedly, possibly, maybe, somehow, I'm not sure, come back to me.
But the AP, at least in this case, did a slightly better job. They acknowledged that there was not, didn't know if there was truth to this, and their headline, and compare this to the Reuters headline, the AP headline was UN panel concerned at reported Chinese detention of Uyghurs.
Oh my God.
So-
that is such a weak, like,
That's more accurate.
it is more accurate.
Closer.
But then the question is, why even report that?
Right.
Why not report AP concerned at the wishy-washiness of this report? Like that, like the language again, and that's a huge part of media literacy, is the language around this shit is just so arbitrary and so like flimsy.
So, then they go on. The gaps left by McDougal, which was the one member who mentioned this, referring to reports made by so-called activist group, the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders. Well, what is the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders? That sounds interesting. Conveniently left out of the story, this is Ben Norton again, is that this organization is headquartered, drumroll please, in Washington, D.C.,
Dun, dun, dun.
and funded by, drumroll please, U.S. government's regime change arm.
Dun, 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 dun.
I mean, you couldn't, like, honestly, you couldn't make up more garbage to fucking put forward. I mean, its annual report notes that this report has been produced with the financial support of generous donors, but the donors are never named. The donors are blacked out, so you can't actually find out who funds this basically U.S.-backed regime change organization to funnel garbage information into outlets like not outlets, but organizations like the UN, which then funnels that garbage report to outlets like Reuters. And by the way, that Reuters report is then, and I used to be like this. I used to read Reuters and think, okay, well, it's not Fox News, it's not CNN.
Right.
Reuters is far more legit.
Right.
And I used to just pick up a Reuters, and if Reuters had a headline that said million Uyghurs in camp in China, I would go, that's pretty unimpeachable. There's no doubt there.
Yeah.
That must be true. They wouldn't run with a headline that adamant if they didn't know. And I now see that it can come from utter garbage. And then John Oliver is like a 18-year-old me. He sees the Reuters headline, and he loves showing, if you watch his show, which I only occasionally do when it's a real egregious segment, he'll almost exclusively quote from New York Times, Reuters, AP. Like, those are his big go-tos. And so if something is said in Reuters, he will plaster it all over. And I know he did a whole anti-China 20 minutes. I haven't watched it in a long time, so I don't remember all the details. But it was utter garbage. And it did exactly this. Quoted from Reuters, million Uyghurs in re-education camps. And yet there's like no evidence for this shit.
Yeah. No, that's why, like, there's the obvious and overt bullshit that comes from, Fox News and MSNBC. Like, that they're not trying to hide their bias most of the time. But the idea is that, like, the propagandization is across so many different outlets. And so the need for media literacy, and it's not like, we're perfectly media literate. It's important for all of us to question what we read and really like work on that, because it's not something that you're taught. It's not a skill that you're given. Of course, on purpose. So again, like circling back to the, a well-educated and questioning populace is much more difficult to hoodwink. So this is something that we all have to work on. But like looking for those like those trigger words like allegedly and
Anonymous sources,
and they're confident that this that this what's the word, official. Well, what the fuck does that mean? Like looking for these words and really trying to dig deep to where this is coming from is super important. And then, of course, the money trail and things like that. So I think that, these sort of these sort of reports, if you don't hear people questioning those sources, you don't hear people questioning the legitimacy of, you know, this UN person or whatever, then that those are red flags.
Absolutely. And if you watch Democracy Now!, I bet you on this, when they reported on this, they probably quoted from, you know, UN and Reuters and things like that. And you really have to dig into, well, where did Reuters get this information? And last thing I'll give this great Gray Zone, from this great Gray Zone article, they looked into the tax documents from this group that is where McDougal got the study that said that China is putting 1 million Uyghurs in camps. That group that's located in Washington, D.C., tax documents uncovered by the Gray Zone show that a significant portion of the group's budget comes from U.S. government's National Endowment for Democracy, NED, a CIA-linked soft power group, basically a CIA cutout, that was founded by the Reagan administration in the 1980s to push regime change against independent governments and support quote-unquote free markets around the world. In 2012, NED gave the network of Chinese human rights defenders, I mean, just look at that name, gave them $490,000, so $500,000. In 2013, it gave them $520,000 from the NED. So this is almost, I mean, this is almost a completely U.S. regime change funded outlet that pumps out false reports and then gets them into some idiot at the UN who's willing to do American empire's bidding, and then they say it, and then Reuters. It's basically it's a game of telephone, but it's kind of like money laundering, where you put it through several areas, like several new shops, take the money in, and it goes out the back door, and then it looks clean. Well, it came from the fucking corner store. Of course, it's clean money. Well, where this information came from? It came from the UN. Oh, the UN must be legit. And the UN goes, well, where's the information come from? Oh, it came from this organization. Oh, the Chinese human rights defenders. Excellent. That sounds nice. Like,
yep.
Just go down the line. Thank you so much, Chris, for that question, and
Yes.
I hope that helped people analyze this data. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't interviews with a Uyghur who's upset about Chinese treatment, but it's clearly not 1 million people in prison like they're telling us.
Right, and I think that speaks to the importance of nuance, right? Like, we're not saying that China is perfect. The idea is that we're not saying that China has concentration camps for 1 million Uyghurs. There's a lot of space in between those 2 points. And that be where the truth is, I think. So,
whereas if you were to see an article saying the United States imprisons 1 million black people, it would actually be legit.
That'd actually be true.
That would be true.
If you see a headline that says there are more black men in prison today than were actual slaves, that's true.
Yep.
So we're gonna do. Are we doing one more, or are we hopping over to extra content?
Do we have a quick one? Or no?
There is a there's okay. I'm just gonna share this really quick.
The Black Mirror.
This it's a Black Mirror moment, y'all. Sorry, but in December, the IMF called for credit score.
This is mind blowing.
To be tied to your internet search history. No, really.
The IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So this is a massive central banking outfit.
So there were 4 IMF researchers that presented a paper that argues that by using non-financial data, specifically, quote, the history of online searches and purchases, end quote, we can solve the problem of, quote, certain kinds of people not having enough hard data, i.e. income, employment, time, assets, and debts available. So basically, you know, if we don't have enough hard data on you in terms of like what you buy, your employment, etc., we'll just fucking stalk you online and use that to decide whether you have good credit or not.
And so there's multiple levels of how horrifying and shitty this is. There's the level of like them tracking your data, which is, you know, horrifying to begin with. But what a lot of people don't think about with credit score, it sounds like a fairly, you know, not a scary thing. It's your credit score, you know, it's how, whether you pay your bills or not. It's like, no, it is a measure of whether you are a good consumer
Right.
and whether you stay within the kind of consumerist capitalist model in a very efficient and accurate way. So if you were someone who lives off the grid, then you have no credit score. If you were someone who, guess what? Your a family member ended up in prison. That was the breadwinner of the household, and then you don't have money, so you get kicked out of the apartment, and then you have to go somewhere else, and you end up homeless for a bit, and et cetera, et cetera. Those type of things, terrible for a credit score. So the credit score in and of itself is a awful class war tool that is used to show businesses whether you are basically of the lower class and should be shat on, or whether you are of the middle and upper class and therefore can be treated like a middle and upper class person.
Like a human being.
I mean, it's a fucking class war battle axe that is used against people. And now the IMF is saying that they should use your fucking data online to give you a credit score, whether you have one or not, and so that they can, cause harm to you if you don't.
Well, basically, let's say that you have some financial data and it's pretty solid, but like me or Lee, you write some shit online that is not nice about the IMF
Right.
or about the state. Well, then that could drop your credit score. I mean, holy fuck! Wow.
Right. And we're already seeing censorship on that level in the sense, like, if I headline a YouTube segment about the IMF, then YouTube will probably demonetize and suppress that segment.
Right.
So you end up with people, trying not to cover these issues or avoiding these issues, and this would just increase that. Hey, if you talk about the IMF, then it could hurt your credit score. If you talk about the American empire, it could hurt your credit score. If you talk about big bankers, it could hurt your credit score. I mean, this is just a fucking horrifying development. If this were to, this is just, granted, it's not going into play yet, but it was
It's a report.
proposed.
It's an idea.
It was proposed in a report by the IMF, which, just disgusting, horrible human beings who want the class war that has been perpetrated by the rich against everyone else for decades. They want it to be much more extreme, much more bloody. So,
Ended on a high note.
it's not in effect yet.
Hey, there you go.
There's the high note.
There you go. And it's supposed to snow tomorrow, so I'm excited about that.
Not necessarily where you're listening, but
No, where
it's
I'm
supposed to snow over all of our listeners tomorrow.
It's supposed to snow where I'm listening. Right here.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. We are headed over to do some extra content over at patreon.com/commoncensored. But also, a couple of quick things. We have a live stream. They're really fun to come and hang out with us. We get to comment with people live and everything. That's on Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/momentofclarity. And I have a new Rockfin channel, which is kind of us building up a way to abandon YouTube if that day has to come where they aren't showing my videos to anybody, which is pretty close. And that is rokfin.com/Lee Camp. And all of Eleanor's stuff is at artkillingapathy.com, and her event is Thursday, right?
Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern over at Frack Tracker. So yeah, come hang.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. We hope to see you Sunday. If not, we'll see you in the next episode. Keep fighting.
Act out.